Hello, and welcome to another trip through time with the Salty Historians Time Travel Excursions. March 18th. We're just going to take a few minutes to escape the current, Anyway, I'm your host, Mary, the Salty Historian, because I host this thing. Anyway, we'll be traveling through several centuries from the 19th through the 21st. As always, however, we need some ground rules. Because people, please remain seated at all times and use your seatbelt. Time machines are fast, but not always reliable. Please also keep all of your bits and bobs inside the machine at all times. Time travel excursions will not be held responsible if you decide to find out why you should. Feel free to take advantage of the snacks hidden under each of your seats, but we aren't taking bathroom breaks, so don't ask. That said, let's fire this thing up. First stop, 1891, when Great Britain was finally linked to the continent by phone lines. Telephones had been in use in the United States about 16 years earlier. But in Britain, the post office, they didn't want competition for the telegraph system. If you don't know what a telegraph is, here, take a look. If you want to know how it works, just look it up when we get back to 2025. Anyway, again, so Britain's post office went to court in 1880 because they saw the inevitable coming. Telephone killed the telegraph star. Wait, no, that's not the song. So anyway, the post office won. And if the phone company wanted to function, they basically had to pay royalties and buy permits from the post office. Really expensive ones. But phone companies were more patient than the post office was brilliant. So on this day in 1891, London and Paris were connected via phone line. 2 weeks later, the public on either side could officially call the other to ask if someone's refrigerator was running. Moving on to 1922, and the first public celebration of a bat mitzvah. Until this day, only boys and men were allowed to read the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. They did so publicly, ritualistically, and were brought to the Torah at 13 years old. Well, there was a brilliant girl with a progressive and intelligent father, who was also a rabbi. He wanted girls to have equal footing with boys, heaven forbid. But that was so when they grew up, they could teach their own children about their faith and their knowledge. Her name was Judith Kaplan. And it happened in New York City. March 18th that year was a Saturday. And that morning, Judith was called to the Torah in her father's synagogue, scandalizing her grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Regardless of progressive, she did not read directly from the Torah scroll. Instead, it sat in front of her, covered. And she read from her own personal piece. She later said, "No thunder sounded, no lightning struck." Yeah, so looks like girls really could read the Torah without bad things happening. Except it took until 1948 for about a third of the conservative congregations to adopt the bat mitzvah ceremony. By the 1960s, it was the norm. And Judith, she went on to study at Juilliard, got a bachelor's and master's from Columbia, taught music at the Jewish Theological Seminary of the American Teachers Institute. She got her PhD in her 50s, and by the time of her passing, had composed a large body of liturgical music, created and broadcast a 13-hour program on the history of Jewish music. She wrote books. One of those books, the first American Jewish songbook for children, published in 1937. I do so love women's firsts. On to 1925, and something that my youngest has told me about several times because he is obsessed with storms. On this day, the great tri-state tornado ripped through 3 states, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. It started about 1 p.m. in Missouri. One farmer lost his life. It raced northeast, leaving more than $500,000 of damage in its wake. 2 more lost their lives. The tornado left the Ozarks and hit farmland in Bollinger County. 32 children in 2 schools were injured. By the time it left Missouri, 11 people had lost their lives. But that tornado was far from done. Most of the devastation occurred in southern Illinois. About 2:30 p.m., the entire town of Gorham was wiped off the map. 34 lost their lives. Over the next 40 minutes, some 500 people lost their lives. Thousands were seriously injured. In eastern Franklin County, the town of Parrish also wiped off the map. More lives lost. The tornado, quote, proceeded unabated across farmland. It surged across the Wabash River. And another town, Griffin, Indiana, joined the other 2 in extinction. Going north, 85 farms were destroyed. In all, about 700 people lost their lives. More than 2,000 were injured. And property damage was estimated at $16.5 million. In the early 2000s, there was a reanalysis project. They determined that the supercell had created that tornado spanned about 235 miles. They additionally found that there were 2 other tornadoes at the beginning and end of that path. The possible length of that tornado, 219 miles of Mother Nature's wrath. We just keep trying to call that back, don't we? What environment? Pshaw. The tornado was what we now call an EF5, the rarest and most devastating of tornadoes. Winds of more than 300 miles per hour. And just so you know, the EF rating that's given is based on the path of destruction, not necessarily the tornado itself. As an aside, because I'm me, you may have heard that there haven't been any EF tornadoes for the last almost 12 years. And that's true. But according to some sources, that's because they've changed the way that they determine that rating. So has it really been an almost 12-year drought? Or are there people that want you to think there has been? On to 1966, when the Scott Paper Company introduced a new clothing line, dresses made of paper. Yeah, seriously. It was supposed to be a publicity stunt. But we know that there are people who will waste money on just about anything. And in this case, 500,000 people did. After the ad went up in Time magazine, telling folks they could send in $1.25 and get a dress of either red bandana or black and white pop art design. Scott made what is the modern day equivalent of just about $6.2 million adjusted for inflation. Wow. I gotta move on. 1992, and American businesswoman Leona Helmsley was sentenced to 4 years in prison, 750 hours of community service, and ordered to pay more than $8 million in taxes, interest, penalties, tax evasion, and mail fraud. But why, Mary? Well, the 71-year-old had evaded more than $1.7 million in taxes from 1983 to 1985. Oh, but she needed that money from the company that her husband owned. I mean, she needed to buy shit. You have to keep up appearances, like a $45,000 clock and a complete renovation of her mansion. You know, inconsequential shit that will never be noticed. At her sentencing, she begged for leniency. Her husband was elderly and sick. Then her lawyers claimed she couldn't go to jail because she had a weak heart. But the assistant U.S. attorney, Mark Hellerer, he called bullshit. He said, and I quote, her ailments had not kept her from appearing on TV talk shows to castigate the government. Ouch, public appearances. The presiding judge clearly would never have been successful today because he believed the law should be enforced regardless of your social standing. Want to know the best part, though? Her former housekeeper testified at her trial. Allegedly, Helmsley said to her, "We don't pay taxes. Only the little people pay taxes. Yeah, kids, not a new thing. We just don't pay attention." Isn't it great to be one of the little people making those kind of people have an easier life? I know, we're such givers. Okay, let's move on before I get really pissed. Also in 1992, American pop singer Donna Summer, also known as the Queen of Disco, got a star on the Walk of Fame. And did you know she was the first artist to have 3 consecutive double albums hit #1 on the US Billboard charts? And she was the first woman artist to have 4 #1 singles in a 13-month period. Okay, let's round it out in 2019, when a fucking pigeon sold for a record $1.42 million. Yeah, before him, the record was a mere $418,000. His name was Armando, aka the Lewis Hamilton of pigeons. The auction house responsible for his sale basically said he was no normal pigeon. After his retirement, he went on to father many, many chicks. Did you know that racing pigeons can have chicks until they're about 10 years old? And they can live to 20. Okay, if March 18th is your birthday, you share it with Arundhati Bhattacharya. I'm so sorry if I got that wrong. She's the first woman chairperson of the State Bank of India. Queen Latifah. You've at least heard her name, and if you haven't, I'm so sorry for you. Vanessa Williams. Yeah, you can look her up. And Janara, a musician and actress from Seoul, South Korea. And of course, we could all use a holiday to celebrate, right? So today is Awkward Moments Day. That's every day for me. National 3D Day. But we live in 3D, so that seems redundant. National Sloppy Joe Day. Am I the only one that can't eat just one? And it's National Supreme Sacrifice Day, honoring those who sacrifice their lives for a good cause, no matter how small that cause. And with that, kids, we arrive back in 2025. I'm sorry. Please take a look around. Make sure you only have your own body parts and didn't pick up any extras along the way. If you did, I don't want to hear about it. Also, please note, if you stuck a limb out the window and you didn't come back with it, tough shit, I warned you. Anyway, thank you for joining me for another trip through time with the Salty Historians Time Travel Excursions.